After watching Channing Tatum's stellar performance as Gambit in the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, Gambit has been highlighted in the mainstream media, and I, for one, am super happy about it because he deserves it. Remy LeBeau is the GOAT, who often gets ignored because the X-Men roster in itself is so wild. But seriously though, look at him. He's a mutant whose touch can charge objects until they explode. How is that not cool? And did you know there's actually a comic that says out loud that he's deliberately walking around weaker than his body allows him to be? Yeah, it sounds crazy, I know. So, today we're going to talk about Remy's insane physiology, how far it can go, and how far it has gone in the comics.
No, sorry. It's one of mine.
What is Gambit's real origin? So when Remy was born, he had red on black glowing eyes, and he was immediately scooped up by the members of the New Orleans Thieves Guild. Why? Because it was prophesied that there will be a child that could either save or finally end the guild's ancient blood feud with the rival assassin guild. Yes, he was supposed to be Le Diable Blanc. The group of thieves became his parents and taught him everything he knows about thievery. Then, when Remy was about 10, he tried to pick the pocket of the patriarch of the family, Jean-Luc LeBeau. Instead of being offended by the kid's behavior, Jean-Luc officially adopted Remy as his own boy, and that's how Remy became a part of the Thieves Guild officially. Now, down the line, to stop the feud between the Thieves Guild and the Assassins Guild, Remy was meant to marry Belladonna Bordeaux, the daughter of the Assassins Guild. The marriage did happen, but it wasn't a happy one, because her brother, Julien, didn't want that marriage to happen and challenged Remy to a duel. Remy killed the poor guy in self-defense and got excommunicated and banished from the guild to respect the peace pact between the two guilds. And because comics love bureaucracy and chaos, there is a genuinely funny footnote buried in his publication history. When you think about his official debut, you're probably thinking of Uncanny X-Men number 266, because that's the in-story first appearance. Here, we see Remy helping a temporarily de-aged Storm survive a run-in with an old enemy. But here's the thing, Uncanny X-Men Annual number 14 came out before issue number 266, even though it was supposed to follow the plot of number 266. Plus, the annual issue didn't have a specific month on its cover, so nobody noticed that the shipping dates were messed up. So in a way, you could say that Gambit's first appearance was actually his own little con job. How does Gambit's body actually turn objects into kinetic bombs? While it might seem like Gambit's just throwing pre-built explosives out of his coat, that's actually not what's happening. See, his mutation's very special. It allows him to reach into the potential energy that is already sitting dormant inside an object and slam the accelerator. Basically, in a matter of moments, he turns that stored potential energy into kinetic force. That too extremely violently, which makes the object too unstable and eventually detonates it. It's like the matter's exploding from the inside. This is important because when you keep that in mind, Remy's body goes from being a biological wonder to basically a physics violation. Any object that comes in contact with him can become a bomb if he wants it to be. The only bottleneck on this whole ability is time. If he has a bigger object, then it takes him longer to charge up the critical instability, while smaller objects can be charged instantly. That limitation is the reason why he has his own signature weapon. Remember the part about how he can accelerate the kinetic energy? Yeah, so because of that, Remy can also accelerate an object's potential energy into kinetic energy in a way that would create concussive blasts. Basically the difference between snapping a card in half and cracking a whip. It all depends on how far Remy wants to push it. Why does Gambit use playing cards instead of just charging bigger, deadlier objects? Remy uses cards for two reasons. The first one's pretty obvious, because cards are the perfect delivery system for his mutation. They're cheap and disposable, not to mention easy to hide in a coat, and small enough to be fully charged in a heartbeat. So it makes sense why he goes for it, right? But there is a second reason. Remy was a thief before he was ever a soldier. And because of his past as a thief, his worldview runs on misdirection and sleight of hand. He definitely doesn't want to show his whole hand at once, pun fully intended. Plus, given how small a playing card is, you have to consider how much damage it can do. I assume that if Remy was charging a manhole and blowing it up, he could probably flatten half a city block in one go. While that's all fine and dandy, he obviously doesn't want to do that because he's not precise enough. A charged card, on the other hand, is precise and controllable. He can specifically pick off a single target. Plus, logistically speaking, a deck of cards gives Remy 52 nearly identical and replaceable munitions. Whenever he's going into a fight with just 2 packs of cards, he has more than enough ammunition. Given his thieving past, if there's anyone who understands cards, it has to be him. He knows exactly how to play with them and use them against people when push comes to shove. But that's not the only weapon Gambit wields. What is Gambit's staff fighting reveal about his anatomy beyond the exploding cards. Even when Remy runs out of cards, he still has one more trick up his sleeve that comes out when his back's against the wall, and that's his bow staff. This bow staff makes him one of the more dangerous fighters in any given room, because he uses his powers in a more up-close and personal way. His fighting style leans hard on speed and balance while using momentum and full-body coordination to its fullest. The staff also lets him be lethal in situations where a full explosive charge would be too reckless, like tight hallways or when there are too many civilians around. The way I see it, his wrists move really fast, keeping pace with his quick footwork, and all the rotational force and his own power work together to make every single blast hit harder than the previous one. This is why he's often ranked so high up when it comes to the Marvel Universe characters, because what makes him memorable is how he can outmaneuver everything thrown his way. Did Mr. Sinister really nerf Gambit's powers by messing with his brain? This has to be one of the weirdest skeletons hanging in Remy's closet. As a teenager, he was almost a catastrophe because his powers were uncontrollable. It was getting so dangerous that he eventually struck a deal with the geneticist supervillain Mr. Sinister to help rein them in. The details came out years later during Remy's own solo Gambit series. There, we found out that actually, during that time, Sinister deliberately suppressed Remy's true potential, which basically clipped his wings so he could function normally. Once you know this, it kind of changes every single Gambit fight scene you've ever seen, because that means the most insane things we've seen him do so far are way less than what he could actually do. That also makes Remy's relationship with his own villain roster a little too tangled. Because Sinister is an infamous villain, he literally traded his own knowledge with Apocalypse for enhanced power. The fact that the same cosmic figure eventually turned Remy into a horseman is kind of a big deal. How powerful was Gambit supposed to be before he started holding himself back? So now that we know that Sinister actually used this procedure, the obvious question has to be, how far does this thing scale you once you take the cap off? And, well, the answer's pretty simple. The ceiling's pretty far. At his enhanced peak, Gambit has been shown to charge objects without even physically touching them. He can also adjust how much energy an object can release when it detonates, and sometimes when he really needs it, he can even tap into his own stored kinetic energy to travel through time itself. If all this seems kinda impossible, then you have to understand. He's a mutant whose power output kinda depends on how much creative or narrative permission he's being given. In his documented peak, his ambient biokinetic energy has been described as forming a visible aura around his entire body. This is like a permanent low hum of barely contained force radiating off of him at all times. Which brings us to our next section. What is New Sun, and is it the best proof Gambit could be catastrophically powerful? Yeah, we're going there. New Sun has to be arguably the single scariest sentence in Remy LeBeau's entire life. This is his alternate reality counterpart hailing from Earth 9921. This version was never adopted by the Thieves Guild or given the name Remy, and most importantly, they were never subjected to Sinister's power-limiting procedure. Raised to use his abilities with zero restraint from childhood onward, this version of Gambit eventually fought and defeated his own reality's Phoenix Force host outright. And the Phoenix Force is a big deal. That's the cosmic force that embodies life, death, and rebirth itself. New Sun destroyed that, basically making him a cosmic tier problem. Then it gets so much worse. New Sun tries to do a ritual to push his powers even further beyond that. But in the midst of this ritual, New Sun lost control of the resulting energy surge, and as a result, he wiped out every living thing on his entire planet. Yeah, he ended up the sole survivor of the whole world, and then spent the rest of his story going from one universe to another to stop other versions of himself from making the same mistake. According to New Sun, once his abilities are fully unlocked, he can charge everything on a pure molecular level, without even seeing or touching them. And if there's a need, he can become a wave of pure kinetic energy to travel between dimensions. Eventually, New Sun came across our Remy, and when I tell you this fight was something else, I mean it. Our Gambit had to lean into the same level of unrestrained power to win against New Sun. So trust me when I say this, Remy could have been 1,000 times worse if he wanted to be. We're lucky that he's a friend and not a foe, because I, for one, surely wouldn't want to face off against Remy LeBeau. What are Gambit's biggest main continuity power feats when he isn't going full New Sun? If you want to see Remy do absurd things with his powers, you just need him thinking on his feet, because that's exactly when he's the most dangerous. His signature move has always been turning the surrounding environment itself into a weapon, basically charging whatever happens to be lying around him, be it terrain or debris. If you look at Gambit's history in the Marvel Universe, you'll see that he rarely wins a fight by being the single strongest person in the room. He always wins by being the one guy who uses the environment around him the best. He improvises his way out of every single fight, mixing raw destructive force and creativity together, which is why, even though it's been 3 decades, he managed to go toe-to-toe with overpowered teammates. What I'm trying to say is, while everyone else in X-Men keeps scaling up, Remy just keeps becoming cleverer and cleverer. Even his limited healing factor has produced one of his single funniest feats on record. During a brutal fight in X-Men number 85, teammate Marrow accidentally put a razor-sharp bone spike straight through his chest. Remy, instead of screaming, calmly pulled it out and let his cellular acceleration cauterize the wound and close it completely, while not letting it break his stride. Why is Gambit so hard for telepaths to read, and what does that say about his biology? Here's the anatomy thing that we have to talk about when we're talking about Gambit. See, his body constantly holds a low simmer of charged potential energy just under the surface, and it generates a kind of natural psychic static, which makes it genuinely uncomfortable for any telepath to get a clean read on his mind. Psylocke learned this the hard way more than once, and Remy has proven time and time again that he can intensify the effect when he needs to, just by holding the charged object close to his own skull. The instability that comes with this mutation runs both inward and outward, but if there's a sufficiently powerful telepath in the room, they can still push through this barrier, but it requires a lot of effort and discomfort on both ends. Also, Gambit carries a subtle hypnotic charm, at least in the earlier comics, and when writers remember it, that he can channel through his own voice. He can nudge the average sentient mind toward agreeing with whatever he suggests. A strong-willed target can shake it off, but on an ordinary mark, that means Remy can talk his way out of trouble as easily as he can blow his way out. And that's why you can see Remy talk his way out of several fights that definitely would have gotten anyone else in his shoes killed. How do Gambit's powers affect his healing, stamina, and survival instincts? Gambit's powers work in mysterious ways. The same power that allows him to charge things can also keep him alive through situations that frankly shouldn't be survivable for a man like him. His mutation lets him kick his own cellular activity into overdrive on command, and basically acts as a limited healing factor. Now this regeneration isn't like Wolverine's healing factor, but it's good enough for our Remy LeBeau. Remy's entire design is basically built around calculated risk, so it kind of makes sense that his own healing factor is quite literally just him pushing through it with his own decision. One of the single wildest examples of this combo happening in real time was when Remy got shot in the head at point blank range. His accelerated healing kicked in fast enough to push the bullet back out before it could do lasting damage. Then, he charged the exact bullet with his own power and fired it right back at the shooter. His own body turned the assassination attempt into ammunition that ended the fight. Gambit is the coolest, and I mean it. What does Gambit's relationship with Rogue reveal about the danger of his body? I know what you're thinking, but this isn't a romance detour. See, Gambit and Rogue have to be one of Marvel's most tangled and tragic couples, partly because both of them live inside bodies that turn ordinary human touch into a genuine hazard. Hers absorbs whatever she touches, while his detonates whatever he touches when he wants it. Their skins are functionally a loaded weapon, but despite it, they are stubbornly trying to fall in love with each other anyway, for years, no matter how many creative teams work on them, because comics love suffering and angst just as much as we love action. In my eyes, whenever I saw Gambit and Rogue on the screen, it felt like one of those tragic love stories that serve more to show us more about the lovers rather than their relationship. Because imagine how lonely Gambit must be under the surface. He's always smiling and cracking wisecracks, but he's still lonely. He wants closeness and connection, and he's willing to push for it, even though closeness comes with a literal body count attached to it. So in a way, I'm glad the person that Gambit fell in love with was Rogue, because if there's anyone who understands where Gambit's coming from, it's Rogue. They've always kind of been my endgame for this reason. There's an innate understanding between the two, and maybe, just maybe, speaking in a purely physics-focused way, their powers would kind of neutralize each other, and they'd be able to touch each other and feel the closeness they're both dying to feel. It could definitely go wrong, but it could be a way. That's my fan theory. Why did Apocalypse choose Gambit to become Death? After M-Day gutted the world's mutant population down to roughly 200 people, Remy did something that still rattles longtime fans for understandable reasons. Emmy walked away from the X-Men completely and aligned himself with Apocalypse. He agreed to be the Horseman of Death across the Blood of Apocalypse storyline, running through X-Men number 184 and 185. And the point to keep in mind, Gambit walked into this with his eyes wide open. He even refused Apocalypse's offer to numb the pain of transformation, because he wanted to stay fully conscious through this entire painful procedure. The recruitment logic gets kind of disturbing when you think about it. He handpicks people whose existing nature already points towards exactly the purpose he needs filled. Gambit already lives with a contained instability running quietly through his own body every day of his life. He understands on an instinctive level how to convert ordinary harmless matter into ruin with nothing but a touch. In the wreckage of M-Day, he's grieving, guilt-ridden over Mystique having driven a wedge between his relationship with Rogue, and desperate to still matter in a world where mutant kind got nearly erased. Apocalypse already knew how dangerous Remy could be, so choosing him was the best course of action. There's also something really tender about Remy insisting on staying conscious through the transformation instead of letting Apocalypse numb him out, because Remy, I believe, would rather feel every ounce of what's happening to him and stay in control of his own choices, even while becoming a living embodiment of death itself, than surrender his agency for even a moment of comfort. What changed in Gambit's anatomy when he became Death? And is that his most dangerous form? The visual itself is striking, right? Chalk white hair, skin going fully onyx black, a whole final boss glow up. But the real shift happened under the surface, because Gambit's usual kinetic gift curdled into something openly toxic. He gained the power to convert ordinarily breathable air into a poisonous gas, He can project several feet before it eventually dissipates and loses its effectiveness. He can also do a darker disintegration charge that can break down living matter on contact instead of simply exploding it outward. New Sun technically still holds the title for Remy's highest theoretical power ceiling, as that scale is borderline planet-ending stuff. But Death might legitimately be his most dangerous mainline form, because it doesn't even require an alternate universe or cosmic entity's intervention to exist. It just requires stripping away Remy's restraint and pointing his everyday gifts at killing instead of surviving. In X-Men number 187, we see Sunfire supposedly burn Death out of Remy, but that doesn't mean Death was completely gone. It kept resurfacing years later whenever something cracked the door open. Especially that unnerving episode when during a mission to the demonic dimension of Limbo, the Death personality fully resurfaced and Gambit just started converting his teammates. He corrupted his fellow X-Men, Northstar and Dazzler, into servants who physically resembled him. Then, in Knights of X number 5, Death came back full force, complete with a direct in-story callback to that original Sunfire rescue. In a way, you could say that maybe the reason Death keeps coming back is that Marvel's writers want to remind us what Remy LeBeau looks like when the leash is all the way off. And there we have it, guys. Gambit might look simple on the surface, but when you start poking around, you'll realize that underneath all that accent and ridiculous coat, we have a GO.A.T mutant who might just be the strongest ally you could have. He's a walking contradiction, and that is exactly why he works so well as a hero and a near monster wearing the same face. The only real question left standing is whether Remy's charm is genuinely hiding his volatility or just barely tamping a lid down on it. Let me know in the comments down below what you want us to tackle next, and I'll see you guys next time.